What's going on, Workforce? Brian and Chris here, and you've brought this video to me, Chris, so I haven't seen this one. Do you want to set it up, or is there anything I need to know?
All right, so Brian and I have talked about this a lot over the years, just kind of what is an MMO to us, what are the differences between the MMOs we play, because compared to a first-person shooter, they all look a lot alike, but when you start to compare them to each other, they can be pretty far apart sometimes. Okay. So you've gotten really into New World. On the left side of the screen is Josh Hayes. You know Josh. Yeah. It's what you get if you Google well-spoken, well-dressed, and filthy Imperial player. And on the right side, we have Callum Upton, who I discovered through watching a lot of this Earth 2 stuff. So if you want to go dive down that rabbit hole and enjoy the cabal of creators there, that's a real joy. And actually, I first met him through, he may have been referenced in a Josh Hayes post. So this is actually just one of their live streams. I enjoyed this live. It was much longer than this clip, I think. So this has been edited down, and they're going to give us some talking points about kind of what is an MMO, because I don't think you and I are exactly in the same spot.
No, we definitely do not agree on what it makes an MMORPG. But like, if you just think of MMOs as an umbrella to subgenres within the genre of MMOs, then that's where I think it's like, that's where you see Sand Park and theme park,
Just make stuff up.
Yeah, just start making up terms. And that's where I think essentially kind of like where you have to kind of classify that, because that's where I see a lot of frustration. Like, you go out to the subreddit for just MMORPGs, and it's literally like everybody just hating on like anything that's like, I thought we're supposed to like MMOs here. Welcome to the subreddit for MMOs, where we hate on every possible MMO. It's something unique, I think, within the genre. And I think it's
good for the genre. It's for new ones to come up. There's this idea that we have to keep drowning all the new guys as they walk into the room.
Just
and like,
stay down.
That's the death of the genre. It's in our best bet that, like, even if you don't play it, that the newest MMOs do well enough that companies are still willing to invest.
Right. Otherwise,
like, wow, this whole genre is bad. Like, they're going to stop investing in the ones we do like.
Turns out, like, all the MMOs that people play are 30, 40, 50, 60 years old. Oh, and I would make a new one, because how are you going to compete with 60 years of content?
You've seen what happened to the last 100 new ones? It was terrible.
It's bad. It was bad for everybody. All right. Let's see what Josh and Callum have to say here.
What is an MMORPG? Just what is it? Mass media online role-playing game? Many men online role-playing girls?
I think it's mass media online rug pulling game.
Rug. Did you say rug?
The reason I ask this question is because it's the most commonly asked or most common argument I tend to see.
We don't agree on it.
In any MMORPG, either group. I mean, I made a mistake a few days ago. I went onto the MMORPG subreddit.
Oh boy!
And they love me.
I'm sure they do.
Death of an MMO guy. So what's this series? Worst MMO
Worst
ever?
MMO
MMO ever.
Yeah. Everybody's got a favorite Pokemon. Everybody's got a favorite MMO. Like that series in and of itself. I like, if you go into it, like,
his goal is to play all of them.
His goal is to play every MMO out there. And then they're all going to be on the list.
They're rough. They're rough.
I love it that he went out to the Reddit, the subreddit, because like, it's interesting when you start to actually think about the MMO. Like, when you go out there, it always feels like everybody's just hating on no matter, like, hey guys, I like really like this about insert whatever game here, and then it's like you're just getting like fired because everybody's come into the MMO genre at some point in time, and that kind of defines what an MMO is for them. Like, I would say for you, World of Warcraft defines
the first MMO that feels like home.
Yeah.
Sets your expectations.
And so for me, Final Fantasy 11 is that definition. And so every time I step back into Final Fantasy 11, it's like, oh my gosh, this feels like home. This, like, even though like it's obviously changed over time, and I think as somebody, as an MMO player, I enjoyed the changing over time. I think that's a part of the experience, that the game isn't set in one moment like a single player game might be, where it's like, oh my gosh, like over the course of the last couple of years, remember when, you know, Final Fantasy 14, I had to go and do all these crazy macros because the game just didn't do it. And now it just handles that for me. And then now I can go and do other things with my time, like, you know, play other games. You know, like that just ends up being something really quite nice. But I think that's where I see it. I see a lot of animosity between MMO players. And I think it's also due to the inherent business model nature of the genre. Like, where you used to have the subscription fee as the be all end all source of it. So you leaving World of Warcraft to come play Final Fantasy 11 was hurting World of Warcraft, because that revenue shared across millions of players generated that content, generated that support for the game, allowed it to continue. And so leaving an MMO, like who was subscribed to more than one MMO? Like who, like,
Right.
I couldn't even fathom it from a time cost, but also like at the time I didn't have money.
Right.
Like it was like, this was actually saving me money because I wasn't going out and buying every new video game that would come out once a month. So I always kind of looked at it and said, oh, I was spending $60 a month on video games. Now I'm spending just $15 a month on one video game. So it was a bargain because I was like pouring myself into it. But I think the model in and of itself created the level of that competition in players. Like that's just kind of how I see it. Like being that you wouldn't be subscribed to more than one game, but now as the model has shifted and you can play more than one game, because you're not like, there's no subscription to New World, there's no subscription for PSO, there's no subscription for Guild Wars, you know, so you can jump into those games and update for free and play if you want to.
Well, distribution's also better. You used to have to go buy discs and
Oh,
all
yeah.
this stuff. So, and like updating, I mean, the idea of downloading an 80 gig game would sound impossible, as opposed to like Diablo Immortal just came out and they're like, oh, you can just download this to your computer for 24 gig, free, hop in. And you're like, well, and if I don't like it after 2 hours, I'll uninstall. Think back. Like, that would have been impossible.
Mm-hmm.
So just from a distribution standpoint, it also would have been hard for these games to succeed. A game can succeed with very little of your attention now compared to back then, where it really needed to be a stronghold in your life, just to even just justify distributing the patches and everything else, and having a server that you could download all this from. Now it can live underneath all these big, like, you have like the Battle.net launcher, you have Steam, you have, you know, the Epic launcher, you have all these places where like a game can be small within like a whole ecosystem. I mean, look at Game Pass.
Yeah.
A game doesn't have to punch above its weight to as long as it's bringing value to the umbrella. Game Pass almost feels like an MMO at this point. I know we're getting like, you know, in that like you're playing it, it's this very shared experience. I can play with friends. There's a ton of people doing it. But instead of being one game, I can jump game to game to game to game rapidly. Yeah.
I think for me, what I would define it here at the start of this video, and we'll see if anybody agrees with it, is that I look at the massive M multiplayer online as the key defining aspect. Lots of players, multiplayer. And so that's when we've seen MMOs become single player experiences that then have the option of multiplayer go as like, it just kind of feels watered down. It feels, you know, and I get it, because clearly the numbers reflect that the M in multiplayer is the niche aspect of it, where you actually attract way more players in the making it accessible and easy to get into. And that's what WoW redefined. It was accessible. People could easily step into it. And all of a sudden, then it's like, and that's why I think it really exploded, because it was something very unique for the time. Whereas in now, like if you go and say, yeah, like you're going to have to party up with people just kind of go like, I don't know. I'm going to go play something else where I just enjoy my experience, right? Like I don't, and we see that with 14, the dungeons going into that ability to play them single player. And honestly, I think that change alone, I've seen so much positive feedback from people who are just like getting tired of being like bullied or having that anxiety.
Oceanic.
Yeah.
I had a 30-minute plus wait with a tank. That's ridiculous.
But I think the one thing that 14 has to do, though, is bring in that hybrid where, like, oh, if you and your friend are playing, you can just play with bots. So that way you could literally have the best of both worlds. Because right now it forces you down that you can play with. It's choose multiplayer or single player, as opposed to like hybrid multiplayer.
And then that starts to ask, are there too many M's? Because when you talk about multiplayer, I don't always want sometimes 10 people, but a very meaningful interaction, or 8 people. Like when you think about something closer to like D&D or like a LAN night when you were a kid, and you all bring your Xboxes over and hook them together. Like that's, in many ways, like that feels more positive to me than like the concert going experience, where there's 20,000 people that all like the same musical artist as me, but I have no meaningful interaction with any of them outside of I hope none of them hit my car. Like that's it. Like other than that, there's lines for the bathroom, there's lines. It's not improving that experience versus something that's more intimate. So like maybe the MMO is just a hard thing. Maybe it's something we think we want, but we don't. As a famous quote that lived perpetually well.
You think you do, but you don't. All right, well, let's see what Josh and Callum have to say. Continue, because we're 35 seconds into this.
The MMORPG subreddit is an excellent place to be if you love MMORPGs and you hate MMORPGs.
Yeah,
Yeah, you
I
can't
agree.
have a middle ground stance on it.
No, you've got to.
You have to be full left, full right on this.
Yeah, your game is amazing and everyone else's game is crap, and even your game is crap. And if someone else says their game is crap, your game is crapper. And if someone else says their game is good, your game is better. You are always playing both the best and worst, and in many ways only MMO at any given time. I went one step further than that. I joined the MMORPG subreddit Discord channel.
Oh, I didn't even know they had it.
Yeah, that's just a load of people arguing about when the next MMO is going to be released. But like, when is the next good game coming out?
MMO culture has this concept of the next big thing. And you ever it's like this hope that's ingrained in MMOs. And it's that hope that I think ultimately also destroys MMOs and puts them into it like a various death spiral. We saw that even though 14 launched with its like issues, it was still like, oh, this is going to be big. And then all of a sudden, no, it's not. And so you see people kind of obviously turn on it. And it took Yoshi P to like, all right, we're going to have to like fully on remake this. And it was that brought in that next big thing. But even still, you can go find people who absolutely hated ARR. And it took years and years and years of struggle before I think players are even willing to accept it. But next big thing, it almost is like you have to believe in this, like, you know, messiah of MMOs that's always on the horizon. Right now, that would be, I would say, Ashes. People are already written.
Oh, Ashes of Creation. Like, that's why I haven't bought a new car, because I'm just waiting for the flying car that Ashes of Creation Collector's Edition is going to come with.
Oh, yeah. I mean,
Like,
they're already selling you that. Like, I'm working on a video called The 3 Seasons of the MMORPG. And Ashes in and of itself actually shows that even in one season, the season of hype as they build the game, you can actually have your own sub-seasons that are like moving on. So it's like people are excited about the news and then they get mad at the news.
If Ashes is 1% of what some people are saying it's going to be, it will be the greatest form of media, better than any movie, TV show, radio show, or game ever created. Like, people have told me a level of hype around Ashes that it's just become...
Everything that
impossible.
Ashes highlights, especially as a sandbox, speaks to me as a sandbox. That's what I came into, and then what I'll see is that you'll see people who came into theme park for WoW expect that like rush to cap and like that whole end game cycle, and then realize that's not what a sandbox is, and then get mad and be like, all right, now the problem is that what's the next big thing after Ashes? And I don't know, because we had a long gap between, you know, the next big thing and the next big thing. And everybody's always chasing this as this theory, when in reality, it's about consistent quality.
Yeah, there's no
updates.
turning point. It's
Right.
something that builds. It's 10 years to overnight success.
Yeah. Anyway.
Probably never at this rate.
Yeah, it's just that forever. All it is that. And you could just suggest work to game. Speak of the devil, thank you very much for the raid. We're talking about what is an MMORPG. And I've asked Reddit and they don't know. And I've asked the Discord and they don't know. So now I'm turning to Callum. Callum, define it for us. Come on.
I think it needs to be broken down into elements, right?
Okay, we're getting complicated already. This is good.
So, MMO, RPG, two separate things. They can be defined in different ways. I would say an MMO is, you know, typically a lot of players playing concurrently on an online game.
Now, let's
think
break
that's pretty
that down
standard.
immediately, because
Yeah.
the arguments, we're going to go through this with a
broad.
fine-tooth comb. I swear to God, man.
Okay.
Massively define. Because some people have said to me that Guild Wars 1 is not an MMORPG, because you have hub cities that people connect to, but when you travel into the wilderness, it's always an instanced zone just for you or for your pre-established party that you create within the hub zone. So how many people do we have to be talking for it to be massive? RuneScape has server caps of, what, 2,000 per world?
Yeah, I don't think it's necessarily about the per world. I think it's the overarching amount of people that you have a chance to interact with at any given time.
Okay.
So in World of Warcraft, we have the chance to interact with 40,000 people, because I believe that's a server cap. That is without a doubt a massively multiplayer online game. RuneScape, I would argue, definitely is, because you're not limited by any number, because you can swap out who's on what server. So you've got potentially millions.
Do you know what? I played RuneScape before I played World of Warcraft, and
Me too.
that to me meant that servers, because I kind of established what it should be like from that,
Yeah.
servers and worlds should always be hoppable between them.
Yeah.
And then
So what's really interesting about this is that there's definitely a push against having servers be hoppable because there's server culture. I think within Final Fantasy 14, like to use that as our base example, is that with World Visit, you start to see more culture around the data center as opposed to individual culture on server specific,
Yes.
because you can move around. And as those lines blend, like I think it becomes very easy. Data center visits going to make it way easier for us to play together. And I think that's actually one of the things that is a strength. The server architecture came out of a necessity from a technology, and that in and of itself ingrained in people that, oh, this is my server and it's unique, as opposed to the aspect of like, oh, you can actually play with anybody that's always playing this game. And you can see that right now, like with New World as the example going against that, where your server is your server. There is a unique culture that happens, and that presents unique opportunities and unique challenges that don't necessarily exist in a game like Guild Wars, where you literally just like, oh, play with your friends, right? Like
Guild Wars 1.
No, Guild Wars 2 though.
Okay.
I'm talking about you can jump in, and like it doesn't matter. You got your tag. People can just join you, and the system handles it in the back end, as opposed to like, oh, I need to transfer your server. I need to do this. I need to do that. And so that's where we're seeing this head. And there are people who are like, no, like the server culture is more important. And so I end up finding that it's like, I think it's more important to be able to play like from a business level with your friends. Like if you can sit here and get connected and it's easy, just like in Destiny, and I see chat was like, on screen was talking about, is Destiny considered an MMO? The devs considered an MMO. It is massive. It's got like 20 million some odd characters, like however many active, players that translates into. So you have the opportunity, especially with cross-play, cross-save, to be able to play with an insane amount of people. However, you obviously have the teams of 3, 6, 12, whatever those different sizes are that ultimately kind of define the content. And that's one of the things you've talked about multiple times, is that is something that's like has got 3,000 people on screen doing stuff fun. And I think that's where it's like, I was running some what we call like chess runs as a part of this train in New World, and there's 100 people, 200 people all running through these high-end zones, just killing these giant bosses. And that was phenomenally fun. It was awesome, and I loved it. And then you kind of have that maybe with hunts in Final Fantasy 14.
Yes.
So that is something that is a piece of content that is available, but it also doesn't define the entirety of the experience. And so massively doesn't necessarily mean that it's always a lot of people, but I think there is an interaction that's important that comes along with it. And I always kind of then look at player trading, because that means is that if you want to be like a merchant and you want to just craft and gather, like that is your enjoyment of the game, and you are actually still participating in every bit of content because you're impacting the economy. You can still get best in slot gear because you make money, and then you can decide if that's what you want to do. You want to purchase that gear to look a certain way or have the stats that you want to have, etc. So it's like it gives you that flexibility. I feel like modern MMOs over the last 10 years though have kind of pulled back on player choice, have pulled back on that economy aspect, and try to make it a little bit safer, a little bit simpler, so that you don't feel like you have to log into the game like you need a job, right? Like, I just want to play this game. And a player driven economy means that, well, you do want to go make money, because money actually has real value to you as a player, and you might feel like you have to go purchase it from some kind of third-party site just to be able to keep up, where World of Warcraft just said, oh, how about we just sell it to you direct?
So then 2 questions about all of that.
Yeah.
First, does the number of people online need to be concurrent? For something like that hunt type description there, they do need to be concurrent.
Correct.
Or is just the fact that like Destiny, 20 million characters, but they're not all logged on at the same time.
Right.
Especially once they're on the same account.
Mm-hmm.
And so like, is it the total number over like a 28-day period? Is it the total number over all time? Like where Final Fantasy's bragging about 25 million, and I think WoW's number is like 100 something million.
Mm-hmm.
Or is it concurrent, where you go out to these like Steam tracker sites and they say there's like actively a million people playing Lost Ark this very moment? Yeah. So like, is that what defines massive?
I think it defines, for me, is that massive really bleeds itself into an open world in which that you actually have that level of interaction as an option. So for example, put in 14, idling at the house, which is an instance section of a zone,
Sure.
maybe I'll see another person, right?
Right.
But idling in Limsa or Gridania or like or even in the zones right outside the city, you see lots of people moving around.
That's actually why mailboxes and vendor trash and auction boards exist. People are like, why can't this just be an interface? Because they're trying to fuel those interactions. They're driving you. You have to go back to town because your inventory fills with junk, or your gear breaks, or you have to sell things on a market board, or there's a quest giver. All of these various game design elements, they bring you into one dense space.
I define the massive as the aspect of seeing other people running around the world. Not that we're having to interact, talk, or even party up, but also I kind of say maybe it's like MP, like massive and persistent, so that the world exists when I'm not logged into the world. Things are happening in the world. My auctions are being sold. Like there's things that, like, putting those things up and having that interaction and logging back in and seeing all that's happened while I was offline. I think that's essentially kind of how, when I think of the M, it's both seeing other people, but it's also that persistence in that world, as opposed to like when I log out, the world in and of itself, like a Diablo, doesn't just go away with me, you know.
So then, as the follow-up question to that, does the quality of the interaction change the definition as well? Like, is 1 million people that are just standing around in Limsa, is that equal to like 10 times 100,000 people that all participate in these hunt things? Or is there some weighted ratio, if we were trying to break this down somehow objectively in a way? It never will be, but like, just as a thought exercise, like, if you are truly interacting, if you're playing a game that has 100,000 players, but you're using actions, you're running hunts, you're integrated into their life, and when you're not logged on, you're like, I wonder what they're all doing. Is that massive in a way that maybe 1 million, you just log in and, oh, there's 1 million characters just standing around? That's massive, but there's no interaction. So like, does one of those hold a greater ownership over that word?
It's the movement. Like, if a character's just standing there not doing anything, it's like, feels like, what would be the difference between that and an NPC that stands there just so you can interact with them?
There's no number that you can just checkbox across. There has to be an interaction.
Yeah, and it's usually kind of the movement, and it's just like, the world feels alive. It feels like it's a place, as opposed to like, okay, this is all curated just for me, right?
Right.
I am, and that's where the story behind 14 and its story-driven aspect is a weird blend, because it struggles with that, because it's like, there's a lot of parts of it that don't feel massive, and there's lots of part of it that do feel massive, and it really just depends on what you're looking at. And that's why you see people come in and struggle.
You can't clear it with friends, and you can't clear it alone.
Right.
Like, it literally is both. Like, you cannot get through MSQ without ever joining a party with other people.
Mm-hmm. And that's
you also
changing.
You can't have a group of friends and do the entire story without breaking party.
Right.
What?
Yeah.
When someone said to me, hey, come and play on my world in World of Warcraft, I got a bit confused. I'm like, what is that? Why can't we change? And then you just said the chance of people you have to interact with. This is something, and again, this is a tangent, but I think it's important. Some people refuse to start playing a dead game because there aren't enough people. But realistically, how many people can you actually interact with in a meaningful way? Because 1 million players, you're never going to meet them all. If a game has 1,000 players and you meet all of them, is that more relevant than 1 million that you couldn't?
And that's something that, again, ties into what you've just said, the world hopping. In RuneScape, if the player count drops by 70%, guess what? You're going to have more condensed world. If it drops, which it did in Warlords of Draenor in WoW, if it drops 70%, which I think halfway through the expansion it had done, you're stuck in, like you say, a dead game. You don't have the chance now of merging and being with people.
I mean, New World.
So I think it really depends.
90%?
I think it was 94% last time I checked, and that was about 2 months ago. So it's horrendously low. And they're constantly merging servers, but they've got an issue because of things in the world that are dynamically different on each world. Well, when you merge them, which one do you favor?
Yeah, which one do you take?
Who controls the thing in that world?
Can you just briefly explain to anybody that doesn't know how they ended up solving that? Because it looked like on the front end, they have created an unsolvable problem, but they have a solution.
So essentially what happens is that there's a world that is getting merged in, like that's the host essentially. Okay. And they basically maintain the rules. So the state. Okay. And then essentially anybody who's getting merged into that gets refunded in terms of their any kind of like property loss, etc., in terms of money, etc. And then ultimately what happens is that everything kind of goes back into fighting for territory and more. So it ends up just kind of being like, if you're frustrated, it's a minor frustration that lasts a couple of hours, and then you get on, and then you're like, okay, what are we going to take? Let's go ahead and get that back. And you actually have plenty of money in your pocket so that it's not like you're like, oh, we can't go and declare war on that. So it ends up being something of a more of a non-issue. What you end up seeing though, like New World's problem in terms of the content that it's added, it's got like OPR, which is the like level 60 PvP endgame. It's also got this 3v3 arena, which is instance for PvP. Like, yeah, we want to zoom in. And what you end up experiencing though is that we have players in New World that want to play on smaller servers, just naturally. Like, I don't want to be on a server that's got a login queue. I want to be on a server that maybe has a couple hundred people playing on it, because they like that more intimate experience, right? Like server identity in this regards, back to what I was talking about earlier. But the problem ends up being is that you have certain pieces of content that then become harder to do on the smaller servers. And so New World, they're working on back cross-server matchmaking for Arena, for OPR. We just don't have a time, and date for that. But ultimately, yeah. And it comes down to like one of the things that's called the death spiral was like when people don't want to play because they like, oh, it's a dead game. Like that all is about trust, right? Like we trust that Final Fantasy 14 is going to release another expansion, so it's worth our time to continue to play it. We trust that because Yoshi P has re-earned that trust. They lost that trust in 1.0, and Yoshi P had to put a lot of work into rebuilding trust. Trust is a currency in that regards. Square Enix just withdrew so much of that with 1.0, and they sometimes do with other things like this year alone. But beyond that, like New World doesn't have, people don't trust in and of itself. And when they talk about the number drop, the numbers drop makes complete sense when you look at New World launched with 4 months of content. How is New World's population? It was great for 4 months of content, even through the bugs, even through the hype and issue.
It that it was never going to be a good fit.
Oh yeah, but like beyond like that percentage, like they talk about like that lost 94%, like you got to look at it like what was the drop from what they actually had. Like I expected New World to have maybe 5,000 concurrent going in. I was like, there's no way this is going to hold on to a lot of people because they're just not, it's not, they don't have 6 years of content. Like you take Lost Ark as the counter MMO launch, and they were launched on an island for 3 years, refined all their stuff and have all this content, and turns out launching a theme park MMO with 3 years of content and more content like on the roadmap, that's a really good win. But New World wasn't going to like have that aspect. But no, like what the thing is, and it ends up proving, same thing with Final Fantasy 14, because if you go look at the various drops that happened within 14, the massive player drop in population from the 0.1 to the 0.5. Like we know that, we see that pattern happen all the time. Yoshi P thought Stormblood was like, okay, yeah, it's just gonna keep going down and down, and then people really got interested in it. World of Warcraft continued to kind of step on its own toes, and then Final Fantasy 14 just like continued to grow, but still within this time frame, there's a drop. But you don't see that reported because people don't worry about a drop in player population in these games because they know more stuff's content.
Right.
Amazon, nobody knows if Amazon's going to release whatever because they haven't done anything yet. They haven't released an expansion, so we don't know if there's an expansion or if it's just going to be these smaller updates that happen every month or every other month, etc. So again, we're all just like figuring it. They're all just kind of figuring it out. What ends up making the most sense. ESO is a great example of that. Like every MMO's come in, people played it, and then it just massively drops, and then that's really where the real work begins. Is that do you continue to support it and persist it? And Final Fantasy 14 has shown that persistence and that payoff and that communication ends up being something that the gamers really value. It helps build trust, and it gets people excited.
Okay.
And I think what we're ultimately going to discover is that MMORPG is far too broad a term.
Oh, yes.
And we're going to get to exactly why, because I want to go through every single letter of the acronym and every single reason behind it. But ultimately, I think it's like calling the genre shooter. If someone says, hey, do you like shooters? I'm like, well, you gave me a perfect example earlier, Cal. You said, what was it, Halo?
Halo and Call of Duty. Even them as very similar games are so far apart from each other that you can't even really compare them.
And if you're talking about shooters, then Max Payne is also a shooter.
Yeah.
Splatoon is a shooter.
Yeah.
Portal is a shooter.
Yeah,
but
Portal is a shooter.
You wouldn't put Splatoon... If someone walks up to you and says, hey, I like Splatoon, you wouldn't say, yeah, go and play Max Payne and Portal. It's not the same. It's too broad. So MMORPG is too broad a definition. But
I agree.
We're still going to break it down in the pursuit of content. MM massively is that the amount of people that have played it before, that are playing it now, that can meet
You know what?
up,
I'm
team
going
together?
to get us a definition of the word massive. How much is massive?
Because I had a guy on my Discord server a couple of months ago who, it was his personal belief that unless he could interact with 1 million people in a shared world, it wasn't massive. It was his belief that there was no game that actually, you know, sated the massive label.
Yeah.
He believed that, there was...
The internet's full of weirdos.
It's massive.
The internet is massive.
Like EVE Online, in my opinion, does a really good job of defining massive interactions in that it does feel like there's one big world and it's so big that different parts of space have different personalities in the same way you talked about kind of server personality.
Yeah.
And the interactions can strive from you can be all the way alone to there are these dense clusters, but you are still existing in the same world. You didn't have to go to a smaller server.
Right.
You just went to a part of space that there weren't other players currently in. And so, like, I think space games in particular have a really, like, they have a less uphill battle because it's easy to be like, and it's big, you know, as opposed to how do you do that on land?
Yeah. Well, and it could be, massive in terms of like No Man's Sky. Like you have all this world to explore. I end up thinking it in terms of population, and not that you have to interact with 1 million people. It just feels that you're not alone, and that the world. And I always kind of view it where it's like the world is more of the character, and you're kind of just a part of it, as opposed to like you're the shining beacon, and the hero. Because everybody's the hero. It's like no. Like we're all here. And it takes like 1,000 of us. Like I even rely. That's where I see the friction between hardcore and casual is just this really weird thing, because like especially a player-driven economy, like a casual player benefits the hardcore player. Like the hardcore player is able to get mats and do all these like things, and player trade ends up being kind of a bigger deal, which I think continues to feed lots of value. But again, it's not a perfect system, but no systems are, right? So it's like ultimately when I look at it. I feel like, when people are able to interact with other players and they can continue to log in and things have changed and evolved, like I kind of view it as that more of that social persistence, where like you look at the first MMOs, there was a game there, they had a game aspect, but a lot of the novelty, a lot of the drive was like, this is a world that exists and it has its own rules, that's its own second life. You can go be who you want to be. But gameplay wise, business wise, was unsustainable, because like you'd go log in and get murdered and then quit the game, and then the game is like, well, we need them to pay for the servers and the development. We need to stop letting people just go and be jerks to each other. So we've seen the MMO itself evolve over the course of the last 20 years, and I think that some people miss some of that freedom that a persistent online world would give them, and that's where they look at it, where it's like, we're talking about an MMO. Especially in that like broader sense, but we're also like, are you wanting the persistent online world and then you want the game, or do you want a game that happens to be sit on top of a persistent online world?
Right.
No definition, no game that was massive enough. Is massive 1,000 players in total? Is it 1,000 players per world? Is it 1,000 players per shard? What is it?
This just made me realise something. Now, we used Minecraft earlier as a reference. Now, there's a server called Hypixel, which is like a very popular Minecraft server, and they had an MMO like shard on that server, and that had about 300 to 3,000 concurrent players, depending on time of year and whatnot.
Okay.
And I played on that for a short while because my little cousin asked me to, and I was like, okay, I'll show you how to do everything.
Yeah.
I would class that as an MMO.
Yeah.
The world was full, alive. There were tons of people everywhere. There was no instancing because it was a Minecraft server.
Yep.
I think it depends. It's a hard one to define, because if I said to you, there's an MMO that I've made and it's got 3,000 players, you'd be like, well, that's not massive. But condense them into one world, that's pretty damn massive.
Because people look at base numbers, and I think one of the worst things to happen to defining MMORPGs was World of Warcraft, not as a game, but as an outlying bit of data.
I don't know where he's going to go with this, but I have a feeling, because I totally agree with that. Like, you think of a band that has a one-hit wonder, like World of Warcraft bringing MMOs into the spotlight. Like you go look at the history, like, oh my gosh, kids, they're like, the news is like, oh, the MMO, it's gonna, like, people aren't gonna ever go outside again, they're not gonna go to school anymore. Like,
they accused it of increasing the divorce rate.
Yeah,
Single-handedly
it's decreasing.
one title.
Yeah, and it's like it becomes, but then essentially what you end up looking at is that, so all of these businesses, right, just focusing kind of on the business development side of it, see this impact, they see these numbers, and they're like, oh, let's do that, that's great, like there's a big amount of money, so they would just like put it in, wouldn't get the instant result that WoW did because of what it did, and then essentially like, oh, let's just do the rug pull and get out with, you know, without having to waste and look at actually what it's going to take to invent. And so you end up having this cycle of World of Warcraft, because of its meteoric success, it really kind of impacted the whole genre, and it hasn't really since recovered. And so people still even look at like, oh, you don't have 12 million subscribers? Failure.
Yeah.
Oh, you don't, you know, it's like, well, no, the game, like the game's doing good. Like it, you know, like you would define Final Fantasy 14, even ARR and Heaven's Word and Stormblood, like, oh yeah, like that, you're still like nothing. And then all of a sudden now you're like, oh wait, you know, turns out like if you put 10 years into it, yeah, and who would? And these investment firms don't have that kind of discipline, nor do they care. They want a faster return on that investment, and that's where you kind of see the bigger shift and the bigger money going into like something like Battle Royale.
Look at No Man's Sky. I mean, it's a totally different game now than when it launched.
Right, exactly.
You
And
know,
in
you
fact,
look
they're
at
doing
these-
that VR thing now. With
And
it
yet,
as well.
it's not 12 million players. You know, you look at what it means to be like an indie dev. Like when you look at like something like Vampire Survivors, something
Yeah.
like 1 million copies or whatever. And, like,
Yeah.
that's incredible. That changes people's lives.
Yeah.
It is nothing on the revenue numbers that have to be on a quarterly spreadsheet of something for some of these big publishers.
Right.
So I think scale has really been screwed by World of Warcraft.
And the question is that will we see it get back to that point in the future? And I think if the business model changes, I think we'll still continue to see MMOs grow. But if you have an aging player base and you can't attract new players to come play your game, then it's just ultimately just going to become like even more niche than what it was.
That Fortnite was it. Like it did it again.
Yeah.
It just wasn't the game that we chose.
Right, exactly.
Because as a game, it was fine. There's positives and negatives to its gameplay, but the fact that it boasted 6 million players at its height means it has set an almost unattainable benchmark.
Well,
Oh god, yeah.
No,
I never see an MMO reaching that again.
12 million, sorry. Someone in the chat was like 12 million. So take away the 12 million benchmark of World of Warcraft and look at EverQuest, Ultima, RuneScape, stuff like that. The metrics of WoW have thrown off the average so much that people look at a game that has 100,000 players and say, dead game.
Yeah, I mean, look at Mortal Online 2. That had 20,000 players on launch, dead game.
Yeah.
But it's a small, tight-knit community of people that like that sort of game.
Yeah.
And it was never a big community.
Yeah,
It
and
was
it wasn't
big for
aiming
the
to be.
genre, but that to me is still a thriving MMO because it's so oddly specific that to garner a following that big,
If we're just basing on a group of people's ability to call it dead, people regularly call World of Warcraft dead, and it still has, 50,000 people watching streams on Twitch. It still has probably a larger daily active subscriber base than most MMOs have in their monthly.
Yeah.
Like it's
that is such a personal thing for the individual though, right? Because it's like server, like even people are working on a WildStar private server. People work on, it's like, no, the people, there's plenty of people who have a passion for that. Is the game shut down or not? No. But yeah, the game, like people have a game die for themselves all the time. And then usually it's because they over consumed it and then they reach a point where burnout really kind of slaps them across the face and they're like, oh my goodness.
Yeah.
And we see that like right now, like what I call, like when I said back to kind of the 3 seasons of games, the season of hype, the season of grind, the season of burnout. And right now, like Final Fantasy 14 would be in a season of burnout. You might not be individually burned out. I'm still playing the game. You're still playing the game. That's just because we play the game all year, every year. But there's plenty of people who are like, all right, woo.
No, they get it way harder than us. They don't play other games at all. They're like, I'm never going to need to play another game again. And we're like, whoa. And they're like, well, you just don't like it as much as me. I was like, I think you're just... Ever is a really long time is all I'm saying.
Really long time, you know?
So I think, like Callum says...
It's a marathon,
like,
not a sprint.
It's continuing to kind of impact. And like the measure of impact should really be the focus, but they're so much harder to quantify.
Yeah. All right, let's continue.
That's impressive.
I mean, how many people does Mortal Online 2 have playing on Steam right now? Can we just get a quick check? Cal, can you please check that for me? I played Mortal Online 2,
really?
the alpha version.
So Mortal Online 2, like I remember so many people coming in and be like, this is going to be great because it's a subscription only, no cash shop game. I go, awesome. It's a sandbox game. I like that sounds everything like I should go and check it out, and I might. Sure. But at the end of the day, I was like, that's not going to be like global appeal. Like you're not going to sit here and become like in terms of not massive in player base, but massive like in just mind share, because you're going to come out, people are going to play it, they're going to like it or not like it, and then essentially they're just going to persist. And so I want them to be a success, but people who say like, oh yeah, we just need a subscription based only MMO, they're not going to have the funds to really like, because there's only the servers are only located in the EU, not global. They don't have the funds, they don't have the money, and at some point they'll either be okay with that, and Mortal Online 2 will be that, or it will continue just to be this super niche MMORPG in a world where everything just kind of passes them up. And that's the same kind of problem with indies. It's the same kind of concern with Ashes. It's the same kind of concern with like, all right, who can actually release an MMO in this economy, in this market, and actually then maintain development and resources behind it on a global scale. And when you start looking at the cost and the factors that people actually still are doing that, Amazon's also working on another MMORPG as well. Like, that's insane. Like, that's like, okay, there's either something there or there's something that's not.
Decided to send it to me for some reason. I said I'm not your guy for this because I'm more of a theme park dude, but I'll happily play it.
Hey, come play our game.
And I could see the quality. Later. I saw some issues, but I could see the quality, and I knew that I wasn't the demographic they were aiming for. 20,000 is more than enough. 20,000 is 5 RuneScape servers. Cal, you're giggling. Why are you giggling, Callum? How many people are playing Mortal Online 2 now?
So Mortal Online 2 may not have been the best example for this.
Go on.
Less than 500.
Okay. Fine. If they're happy with that.
There's twice as many people watching this conversation live on Twitch than there are playing Mortal Online 2. But
if they're profitable,
again, it is.
If you and I built a game and we had 500 people playing it,
I'd be thrilled.
It'd blow my mind.
Yeah. How many people do you have playing Space Game right now?
27.
See, all right, we're on our way.
Yeah, and so, and like, I know Callum has built a number of projects and stuff that, Callum, yes, I would be thrilled on that scale. But when I look at what it would take to keep servers up and pay multiple devs,
oh yeah,
500. If this is how much they need to make, and 500 is the number of players. What's that math?
All right, let's assume like the subscription here, Cal. Yeah.
I mean, if the subscription is $100 a month. So
well,
just $1,200 a year.
15 times
still,
500.
How many employees does that pay?
So that's $7,500 a month, which is less than I need to pay for my family.
And you're not hosting servers.
I'm not paying for servers. So that's, I mean, but they're looking at a concurrent number. So if we take 500,
you back out taxes, you back out marketing budgets, you back out artists.
Right. So if we look at 500, the industry standard when it comes down to what I would say is they actually look at the hours played as well. Is that kind of like as important? Something we actually look at here on YouTube, hours watched over necessarily views, because we make also longer form discussion videos. Yes. So it's like, are people interested in the discussions we're having? So 500, typically the industry standard is times 7 to 11. So we just times that by 7 players. That would roughly be 3,500 players, or again, 500 times 11. So a range of 3,500 to 5,500 players. And so if we take the max right now times 15, they'd be making $82,000 a month if all of those players are subscribed on the high end. And again, 3,500 times 15 a month, you'd be looking at a range of 50,000 to 82,000 a month.
So it's a big number.
And it's a sandbox, in that regards. And and how you actually get to that number, because people are like 7 to 11, Brian. What do you? It's industry standard because you look at the hours played. MMO players, actually recently COVID changed the average gameplay. It used to be 7.1 per player per week hours. So it would estimate that on average, one gamer would play 7.1. And so that means there's gamers that play more than that. There's gamers that play less than that. Overall, that's the average. COVID shifted that up to 8.3 hours per week. Makes sense. You know, maybe you're not commuting, and so you have more time to play games. I would say MMO players, I always factor in that. Actually, I was doing for pre-COVID at 10. I would say 11, probably 11.5. For post-COVID in terms of like hours played, because MMO players tend to have longer gameplay sessions over the course of the week. So when you actually factor all that in, it's like, if let's say their operating cost is below that number for the devs and the servers, then it's just a matter of like if they can continue to grow that. If they have continual population decline, Do they then compromise and introduce a cash shop so their biggest fans can support them? Do we then turn on super chat and bits like that, like so your biggest fans can support the content that you make? And the answer ends up being, I guess, yeah, we'll have to wait and see with Mortal Online 2, because if the people are playing it and it's enough to keep the servers going and the devs are happy with the work and what they're getting paid, that's more than fine. But that's where I think when people look at concurrency as the be all end all, it's not 500 players and that's it a month. You got to look at the MAUs to see actually who are people jumping in, touching the game and enjoying it.
Sure.
Is that us instantly putting that number down? Because if someone had said, hey, there's 500 people playing this game right now, is that still good? Because we don't have a benchmark.
No, and we also don't know how many servers that's spread across. If that's on one server, that's
only have
awesome.
one server.
That's more than enough players to interact with, because their servers aren't very big, like map-wise. Their maps aren't massive. So, yeah, 500's pretty decent. I would say an MMO needs at least 500 players just to fill a server.
Yeah.
Fill a server with 500 players. You'll always be running into people. I've always done this in MMOs, where if I've run around for more than 5 minutes and I haven't seen another player anywhere, that's when I start to get a bit worried about the future of the game.
Did we come to a number that we think massively should be represented by?
I think if you have the chance of interacting with 500 players at any given time in the world, I'd say that's massive.
Yeah, I'd agree.
Yeah, the difference, and let me make sure it cancel before just like, hey, let me run the Steam Deck Ultimate Guide that I just created. Essentially what I would say is that when you start to factor that in, is that you also have the impact of the internet having truly kind of that massive. And so from a scale of 500 to everybody that's on the internet, like I can see how people will have varying different definitions of what massive means to them. And so my view in and of itself is like, I could agree with the 500 number. Like if you're on a server and it's got 500 people, like there's a lot that you could do there. And then ultimately then it's about ease of access and use. And essentially how do you invite people into that world? And I think you got to get over this hump, because there's plenty of gamers who just follow what's ever hot. They're only there, like they're always there for the hype and whatever's there, and they bounce out. Right, it's fun. So like, but we shouldn't count them in terms of like actual like investment. You look at the people who are playing it, who are active, who are passionate, who are evangelizing, and then you build from there. Like, and then it's about inviting people into the game, and then how do you invite them back into the game? Because what we've seen across the industry, any game you define as an MMO, people take breaks, and that's where I think Yoshi P's model of it's okay to take a break works outside of housing. But I hate 14's housing system. I've already talked about that. But beyond that issue, it's like, it's just about, jump in, play when you want to play, step out, don't play when you want to play. You don't feel like you have to log in. In some games, like a lot of the free, like even on the Diablo Immortal, like it's considered, by definition MMO, they have those daily logins. They want you to continually touch the game every day or every, thing to really drive that interaction, because they know that has a bigger impact. So as long as people are talking about it, they're touching it, and you get other people a reason to log in. I think that eventually does burn out people. I think that definitely people that have come in MMOs previously, they get fatigued with those kind of daily systems. I think 14 having dailies, but having kind of a story that it tells, that eventually caps it out, meaning that you don't have to keep doing it every day. You don't feel like I have to log in every day, otherwise I'm missing out. Right. Is actually really important to the health, but also it kind of serves both aspects. As soon as the update drops, I think by the time this video is up, probably tomorrow, where they actually introduced the Asladara, we got the Beast Tribe daily quests. I'm going to be taking part in that. I'm excited about
Especially
that.
for the first 2 weeks.
Yeah, and then I'm going to finish the story.
Jobs that are from 80 to 90, you'll do it a lot, because it'll probably be an incredible experience.
Yeah, it's going to be. Well, I mean, if the Pixies showed us
if it's anything like Pixies, you and I will do it every day we log in. We'll do it a lot during the first 2 or 3 weeks, because we'll want to get through that storyline and get the mount or whatever. Yeah. And then after that, we'll do it as part of every time we log in. But if you're not going to like go out of your way, if you weren't going to play today, that's not enough of a reason to change that. Yeah. It's just while I log in, hey, as I get situated, let me just do this 5-minute task real quick.
Well, that was a great video.
Cool.
Good job on the raid. Shout out to Work to Game for the raid. Woo! Those guys. All right, guys, that's going to wrap us up for this video. Thanks so much for watching. Let us know what you think, and hopefully we'll see you on our next one. But until then,
take care.